Guys, what's going on? It's time for an update on the 2025 GSXR 1000. I'm going to give you guys a recap as far as what modifications have been done to this bike, some future plans, and a bit of an idea for what it's like to ride this motorcycle with a proper ECU flash. This has got a more Mafia tune on it, and it is so far and away better than the tune that was on this bike previously. So let's dive into it. We got the key in the on position. Mileage on the bike so far, 1,086. So yes, we are out of break-in, technically, I suppose. The mode that I like to ride this bike in is A, and the traction control setting at 1. Those are the most aggressive of the settings. And I'll put it to you like this, guys. They don't really interfere with any kind of playing around you might want to find yourself having with a bike like this. As far as stepping the rear of the bike out or doing wheelies, this bike doesn't really seem to be interfered by any nannies in that setting, at least none that I've found anyway. So let's dive into what has been done. So first of all, you can see the tail tidy, cleaning up the back of that bike nicely. That M4 slip-on peeking out from behind that tire. Looks so good in carbon fiber. Love the sound of it too. One thing, latest update is this is a Bridgestone S23. I'm no longer running the Bridgestone R11s that came on this bike. Those are a softer compound in general, and they are wearing down the center pretty quickly. And because I've got to ride quite a ways to get to where I do get fairly aggressive, where there's some really good riding out there, I needed a little bit different kind of tire that was going to be a little bit more street friendly. But what I will say about these S23s, and I'm just now getting them broken in, but yeah, these things are awesome on the side of the tire. They don't really, to me anyway, feel much different than the R11. So for you guys that are very aggressive street riders, I can give you my wholehearted endorsement of the Bridgestone S23. Absolutely love these tires. I'm running 38 PSI out back on this tire. By the way, I'm still rocking the R11 front, and pressures up there typically 36 up front. So 36 and 38 are what I like to ride. I'll usually go around 35, 37 if it's a hot day, but for typical, this seems to be working pretty good. Anyway, getting back to this. So it's got a 44 tooth rear sprocket, calmed it down a little bit, made it a little bit less buzzy. The factory 45 tooth rear sprocket could get a little bit numbing at cruising speeds for long periods of time, say 85 or 90 miles an hour. The 44 just makes it a little bit nicer to ride longer distances. So while I'm here talking about the sprocket and the tire, huge shout out to Tommy and the crew over at Stubbs Cycles. They installed the rear tire and threw that rear sprocket on for me in the service department. And I got to tell you guys, I mic'd the positioning where they put the, where you got the little marks down here. Anyway, I actually took a micrometer. These guys got that setting within literally the same millimeter, both side to side. That's how precise those guys were. So definitely gentlemen after my own heart when it comes to being a bit particular about how they set that up. So guys, Stubbs Cycles, Tommy, tell the guys I said thank you very much. I appreciate their attention to that detail. So up here at the front of the bike, got the ASV levers, clutch and brake. We've got the winglet mirrors. Love the way that those look. And I like that they're small, nice little blind side finders. Those are just fine. The factory mirrors rattle anyway or vibrate. So there's that. We've got the Hot Bodies smoked side blinkers. Okay, here we go. So, and I've installed the relay so that it chills out that flash rate. Okay, so now on to suspension settings. Up front, I have pulled a half turn out of the preload, which for me at about 200 pounds gives me 37 millimeters of sag up front. As far as compression and rebound go, those are both a quarter out from factory. So I've softened it up just a little bit. Out back for high and low speed compression dampening, those are both set to 3/8 of a turn out. And for rebound, let me get up in there. For rebound, I've got that set to half a turn out from factory. Okay, guys, so back in the office, listen, the way that the bike is set up from the suspension point of view alone is nice. I was able to get the bike out in some 80-degree ambient temps, and with the suspension settings I was just sharing with you guys, this bike sets up in corners, especially high-speed sweepers, incredibly nicely. It gets down the road. It's a bit more compliant than what it was from the factory. Factory settings were pretty harsh on this bike, I do have to admit. But now that it's kind of dialed in a little bit, the bike does feel a lot better. It's a lot more compliant, especially at speed. There's a couple of sweepers that I like to air this bike out pretty well. And I can tell you this, it sits down very nicely, very predictable, no head shake or anything goofy like that. Just absolutely eats up some of these long sweepers. And when I say eats up, I'm talking about entry speeds on these sweepers between 110 and 115 miles an hour with exit speeds, just as you're coming through the apex, pouring on the coal. I mean, what's a big number sound like to you? I mean, this thing will get up to well over 140 miles an hour as it's on the side of the tire on those exits pretty easily. So absolutely love the way that the bike feels now that it's a bit better set up. Now, as far as future plans go, you got to keep in mind, right now I'm still rocking the factory exhaust with the factory catalytic converter. It's got the factory air cleaner, pair valve, all of that stuff is still included on the bike as it sits. It just has that M4 slip-on with the 12-inch core. I love the way that the bike sounds, and I love the way that this bike runs. It will probably eventually end up getting a full M4 system though, mainly just to shed a little bit of weight, because with that Chris Moore tune, I can tell you that there's not a lot that's going to separate this motorcycle in terms of peak power from where it is now to where it would be with a full exhaust system. The main benefit to that full exhaust is going to be obviously weight savings and quite a chunk of power through the mid-range. I can tell you this right now, the bike is an absolute beast though with that tune, but it's a controllable beast. One of the things I love about that tune is that it is very smooth on throttle transitions. Low RPM, slight twist of the throttle. The bike is very smooth. It has great throttle response, which is good for me because I blip downshift still. Even though it does have a quick shifter, I do still do my own blipping on downshifts. The extra throttle response helps out a ton. And the reason why you would think that this bike, it's a GSXR 1000, it's a sport bike, shouldn't it have great throttle response? Well, yeah, it does. But the problem is when it's untuned, it's extremely lean. There's not a lot of fuel getting introduced into the engine when you are just at partial throttle, which is where you are on blips, which means it can fumble a little bit. It'll stutter on those quick throttle blips. Doesn't do that with a tune. And that's one of the key takeaways. It's mainly rideability. In terms of power production though, oh yeah, it makes a lot more. De-restricted, this bike is a bit of a handful, to say the least, especially in first gear. And that's even with me going down a tooth on that rear sprocket. Guys, I can tell you that unrestricted, this bike is pretty intense in the first two gears. But I will say this, it's very smooth and very manageable. And in the higher gears, as I'm setting this bike up for those sweepers that I was just talking about, I can park it in fourth or fifth gear. And as I start to crack the throttle, going from maintenance throttle or slack throttle, entering through that apex, once I start rolling on the throttle, it's very smooth and the power delivery is very buttery. It just allows you to plant the power of the bike down. And so all of that is worth it to me. Just that alone. But the power increase up top and through the mid-range, it's noticeable, but what I want to say is this. It's not completely motorcycle altering or riding experience altering. You just have to know that it's unrestricted. So at partial throttle, where you might get a little bit of a lift of the front tire in first gear, now it's really coming up quickly. So it's just a bit of an adjustment with how your wrist is going to translate into front tire lift with the bike in the lower couple of gears. But where you really notice the difference is that area just the other side of, say, 11,000 RPM. With the GSXR 1000, And with all of the Japanese leader class bikes, they start to pull the electronic throttles closed after about 11 or 12,000 RPM. And you notice it. The bike just kind of lays over. Well, it doesn't do that anymore with this tune. Matter of fact, it feels like it just will never stop pulling on the big end. So that's a fun thing. You just get the essence of you've got a lot of over rev with the bike that you simply didn't have before. So it's not scary faster. It's just continuing being scary fast for a little bit longer. So that's a lot of fun. It brings out a lot of the character of the bike as well. So in all of that being said, I got to tell you, I love where the bike is right now. I love the way that it handles with the Bridgestone S23 out back. I absolutely cannot say anything better about that tire so far. The R11 up front still feels really good, but once that thing wears down, or probably at the end of the season, I'll probably end up putting an S23 up front just because matched set. But I love the way this combination feels already. I can't wait for the season to start. It's still a little bit chilly outside. We've had a couple of warm days, but I can't wait for the season to start where I can really start running this bike through its paces. I like the way the suspension is set up with the tire combination and with the adjustments that I made to the suspension. Again, in 80-degree weather, the bike feels great when it's nice and warm, but I will still have to say that in cooler temperatures, say below, I don't know, 65 degrees, maybe getting really more into the 60-degree range Fahrenheit, it can still be a little bit harsh. But it's a sport bike. It's supposed to be a little bit stiff anyway, right? But once it warms up, things loosen up and the bike really does hunker down and it's a nice, more compliant ride. But that's the updates on the bike. In general, guys, I got to say, more and more impressed with the bike the more time I get a chance to spend with it. Can't say thank you enough to the crew over at Stub Cycles. Tommy, the guy's got the rear axle adjustment on that sprocket install. They got that literally within the same millimeters side to side, so awesome attention to detail. Highly recommend the service department over at Stubbs. If you need work done to your bike, take it over there. They'll take good care of you. And that attention to detail catches my attention. Hope it catches yours as well. And a big thank you to Chris Moore over at Moore Mafia Tuning. Set this bike up beautifully. And when I do get that full M4 system, whenever that is, I will be sending my ECU back to Mr. Moore for an update and a reflash. Can't imagine it running better, but I know he's got ways of making that happen. And guys, with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Post up your comments. Let me know what you're up to with your bike, and we'll hope to see you on the next one. Take care.